And thank you to all of you for coming this morning. I really appreciate you being here. By the way, we are hosting an impromptu Psalm 19 astronomy event tonight at the Water Tower in Round Rock. If you're interested, we should be set up by 7 p.m. So, here it's Christmas time, and typically in December, around Christmas time, people that know that I'm an amateur astronomer will inevitably ask me, what do I think the Christmas star was? Last December, the world was treated to what many in the professional astronomy circles dubbed the Great Conjunction and nicknamed the Christmas star of 2020. Jupiter and Saturn were going to appear close together in the sky after sunset. Their separation was going to be less than 1/4 the width of the full moon. There was a lot of fanfare because this was the closest that the planets had been since March of 1226. Here's an image that I took with my iPhone through the telescope, and you can see Jupiter on the left with its moons and Saturn on the right. And here's a much better one that I gleaned from the internet at 45x magnification. We were blessed here in Central Texas with very good weather before and after the conjunction, so I set my telescope up at the Comet at the end of my street on several nights before and after the conjunction. It was truly a marvelous thing to see and follow each night in the telescope. I even hosted an impromptu event for my neighborhood and my church youth group on the evening of December 21st when they were going to be the closest. Remember that this was in the middle of the COVID pandemic. About 45 people showed up to look at the conjunction. Thin clouds moved in about an hour after sunset, as you can see from these photos, but we could still see the two planets quite well through the telescope. Even as great as this phenomenon was, we could still visibly distinguish the two planets as separate objects with our unaided eyes. The two planets didn't quite merge into a single star, so it was not quite as stunning had the two planets merged into one star. All the talk about the conjunction got me interested in researching the modern theories about what the candidates were for the Christmas star. The quest to identify the star that led the Magi to Bethlehem goes back to the early centuries of the Christian church. There were differences of opinion even back then between a natural and supernatural explanation for the star. The early church father Origen thought that it was a comet. John Chrysostom in the 4th century thought that it was a supernatural phenomenon. At the dawn of the scientific discipline of astronomy, Christian astronomer Johann Kepler believed the heavens revealed the glory of God as declared in Psalm 19. He's my kind of guy. Kepler observed a very bright star on October 17, 1604, that burned brightly through the night and even into the following morning, and then was visible for up to a year. This was in Prague. Kepler was convinced that the new star was the same one as the one that the three kings followed on their way to Bethlehem. So you see, the Christians have been trying to identify the star that led the wise men to Bethlehem for 2 millennia. Here's the general outline of my talk this morning. I'm going to read the Matthew 2 Magi story. I'm going to summarize key points of the Magi story. I'm going to go over who were the Magi and where did they come from. I'll look at celestial candidates for the star. I'll go over when did Herod die. I'll look at contemporary sources for the interpretation of Matthew 2. I'll review 3 contemporary explanations for the star. And then I'll provide the Psalm 19 astronomy perspective and summarize final thoughts. And I'll do this in all under 55 minutes, according to John. All right. I'm going to start by reading the Matthew story, 12 verses. It's really important. This is from the NIV. The Magi visit the Messiah. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi, or wise men from the east, came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all of Jerusalem with him. When he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. "In Bethlehem in Judea," they replied, "for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people." And this is from Micah 5. Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out for them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me so I too can go and worship him." After they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw a child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. So you see, there's not a whole lot to go to here. There's only 12 verses. We need to understand that the story takes place about 1,600 years before the telescope was invented. What people called a star in the ancient Near East times could be any of several celestial objects, including the 5 planets visible to the naked eye. So the key points to the story are, first, only the Gospel of Matthew mentions the story of the Magi and the star. Second, the star is mentioned 4 times in verses 2, 7, 9, and 10. Third, the Greek word aster, translated star, can refer to any kind of celestial or heavenly body, a star, a planet, an asteroid, a comet, a meteor, or other celestial object. Fourth, the wise men arrived after Jesus was born. So all those Christmas cards you have of the Magi and the shepherds together in the manger, they're incorrect. Number 5, the Magi see the star the first time at its rising in the east. This is important. It does not state that the Magi were in the east and saw the star in the west. The Magi see the star associated with the new king rising in the east, much like any other star would rise. Note that an important component of Middle Eastern astrology was the time when a celestial object rose in the eastern horizon just before sunrise. It's called a heliacal rising. Number 6, the star is important enough for the Magi to make a long journey westward on short notice. We don't know their exact route, but it was anywhere from 600 to 1,200 miles. Number 7, the key timing is before the death of Herod the Great. This is because the death of Herod is used in contemporary scholarship and astronomy software to determine when to look for the star. Number 8, Herod and all of Jerusalem were greatly disturbed. These foreigners showing up and saying, "Hey Herod, where is your replacement? We've come to adore him." Herod is old and his health is failing. He is getting ready to appoint 3 of his sons as co-rulers in Judea. You bet everyone was disturbed. Number 9, the birth of the new king of the Jews would upend Herod's plans and strike fear in the Jewish leaders and the people. Number 10, the Magi see the star a second time when they depart Jerusalem and head to Bethlehem. It's not that far away. Bethlehem is only about 6 miles due south of Jerusalem, or about a 2-hour camel ride. Number 11, the star appears to guide the Magi to Bethlehem, and it stops over the place where the child was. This is a very key important verse. And number 12, the Magi were then warned in a dream not to report back to Herod. So, who were the Magi? From the early church historian website by historian Sandra Sweeney Silver, she states that in the ancient Middle Eastern world, these Magi were trusted advisors to kings. They were learned men proficient in the knowledge of astronomy, medicine, astrology, alchemy, and dream interpretation. The East at the time of Christ's birth meant the areas of Media, Persia, Assyria, and Babylonia, countries now encompassed by what is Iran and Iraq. And here's just a quick image. It's part of the Fertile Crescent, the green area. And I drew a box around Babylon on the right and a possible path with that red arrow over to Jerusalem. And finally, the Jewish diaspora in Babylon may have passed along the Jewish belief in the coming of the Messiah to the Magi. Many sources state that they were priestly followers of Zoroaster. These wise men were professional astrologers whose job was to observe and chart the stars to make calendars for agriculture. It's kind of like an ancient version of the old farmer's almanac. They also were concerned with the meaning that could be derived from the motion of planets, comets, and the phases of the moon. Please keep in mind that although the Magi were learned and respected men, they did not have a modern understanding of astronomy. They didn't know that the wandering stars were planets that orbit the sun, or that comets are ice balls that revisit Earth periodically. I got one slide. I just want to go over the difference between astronomy and astrology. Astronomy is the modern study of the motions of celestial objects and didn't become a scientific discipline until the 1600s. Astrology holds that stars exert forces on men. Astrology assumes that stars are causes of earthly events. The Old Testament Bible prohibits the worship of what we see above or even holding such things in too high of a regard. But the Bible does teach that the heavens can bring messages about earthly events. Both Old and New Testaments assume that what happens in the heavens matters down here. So what are the star candidates? There's been a wide variety of scholarship that has been done regarding the star over the centuries. The scholarship ranges from a real star to the story just being a metaphorical language used by Matthew for credibility with the Jewish people. It's important to note that the star is any celestial objects, and again, the 5 visible planets to the naked eye were observations and were considered wandering stars. Even today, when we host sidewalk astronomy events and I point out Jupiter or Saturn or whatever, most people think, you mean that star? No, that planet. A guest star or a new star is one that appears and lasts for a short period of time, such as a supernova, a nova, a variable star, and sometimes a comet. Here's a list of candidates. Those in light blue would qualify as a guest star or a new star. You have a variable star, number 1. Number 2, a nova or supernova, which is an exploding star. Number 3 is a recurrent nova, so it's a star that explodes, gathers more material and matter from its neighboring companion star, and then explodes again at some time later. You have a conjunction of planets. Number 4, a conjunction is when 2 objects in the night sky appear to come very close to each other visually. They're not really that close, but they appear to come close together. Number 5 is a comet. 6 is a meteor. 7 is a moon-planet conjunction. 8 is a supernatural event by God. And 9 I added as part of this year-long study. It's interstellar objects such as Umau that was discovered in 2017. That's an object that's outside of our solar system from another star system. We can quickly eliminate meteor and moon planet conjunctions. Meteors are short-lived, at most about 10 seconds, so they wouldn't qualify as recurring. And moon conjunctions are very common. I've seen several over the past few years between the moon and any of the planets that are visible. The wise men would have been familiar with predicting a moon-planet conjunction from the star tables that they created. I want to touch briefly on who was Herod. Herod, also known as Herod the Great, was a Roman client king of Judea. He was named Tetrarch in 40 BC by the Roman leader Mark Antony, and Tetrarch means he's a ruler of 1/4 of an area. He was a brutal leader who killed anyone whom he viewed as a threat, including a wife and a son. And he was believed to have been born in 72 BC and died in either 4 BC or 1 BC. There is some confusion as to when Herod died because of errors in the works of Jewish and Roman historian Josephus Flavius. He recorded the history in a manuscript called Antiquities. Josephus wrote that Herod died after a lunar eclipse and before the following Passover. So we can go back in the calendar in time and know when every single Passover event was because it's tied to the moon cycles. And then we can use astronomy software and go back in time and see when lunar eclipses happen so they can pretty much narrow down when he died. And here's the issue. Handwritten manuscripts before 1544 AD, before the time of the printing press, say Philip died in the 22nd year of Caesar Tiberius with a 32 or 35-year reign. Philip was one of the sons of Herod who took over part of Herod's kingdom after he died. The 22nd year of Tiberius is 36 AD, so Herod's death would have been in 1 BC. Printed editions of manuscripts after 1544 AD say that Philip died in the 20th year of Tiberius, and he reigned 37 years. The 20th year of Tiberius is 34 AD, so Herod's death would be in 4 BC. So the confusion affects the timing of the Christmas star used by different scholars. I lean towards the 1 BC date because it clearly appears to be a translation typo error when going from the Latin used by Josephus to the Greek that introduced those into the printed copy regarding the year that Philip died. Here are several contemporary star explanations that I studied over the course of the past year. I spent hundreds of additional hours perusing websites related to the star. You have Rick Larson's The Star of Bethlehem movie in 2007. You have Colin Nichol, who wrote a book, The Great Christ Comet, in 2015. And then you have our Dr. Hugh Ross, who has various RTB commentary going all the way back to 2002. These first three I will discuss next during this talk. There's a spoiler alert here. Details about the first three sources of what the star was will be revealed during this talk. So if you don't want to know what it is, now's probably a good time to go take your morning walk. I also reviewed the next three, but time doesn't permit me to go into detail on each of them. You have Dr. Rick Erickson, the Star of Bethlehem presentation to the Temple, Texas Bible Church in 2015. You have a BBC show, a Christmas special in 2019, The Sky at Night, The Real Star of Bethlehem. And then you have Dr. Mark Kidger, his book, The Star of Bethlehem, An Astronomer's View in 1999. And by the way, Dr. Kidger appeared in that BBC special. It's a really interesting and well-done special. You can see it on YouTube. It's only about an hour long. Prior to this study effort, I was only familiar with Larson's and Erickson's proposals, which are similar. All the authors based their theory on the chosen date of Herod's death as either 4 BC or 1 BC. All right. Now I will talk about three contemporary scholarly works regarding the star. But before I start, I would like to read this quote by RTB's Dr. Hugh Ross regarding the scholarly studies of the star, as I believe it speaks to the caution that all researchers should adhere to when evaluating the star in Matthew 2. Dr. Ross says, "Let me begin by saying that all explanations for the Bethlehem star, including my own, must be considered speculative, no matter how much certainty an author may claim. With such limited data to go on, even including insights from other potentially relevant biblical texts or from astronomy software, no conclusive argument can be made." There's only 12 verses, right? That's why, as an astronomer and Christian apologist, I refrain from proving the reliability of the Bible on the basis of the Christmas star. So the first one I'm going to cover is The Star of Bethlehem by Rick Larson. Who here has seen the DVD? Okay, quite a few of you. Who here has seen Larson give the presentation in person? I got you all beat. I'm the only one. I was fortunate in 2005 to see him give it in person at Gethsemane Lutheran Church here in Austin. Larson is an engaging speaker, and he put on a very slick presentation, as you can see from the DVD, and he used this cool Starry Night astronomy software to go back in time to look at the celestial candidates. This talk is what sparked in me a renewed interest in astronomy. So, a background on the star. It was released in 2007. It's the most famous, I think, of the star narratives because of the DVD. It's been presented to churches around the country, and Larson has been interviewed numerous times on Christian and secular television stations as well as on print. Some of Larson's material is based on the 1991 book, The Star That Astonished the World by meteorologist Ernest L. Martin. Larson believes that Herod's death was in 1 BC, therefore the time frame for the star is 3 to 2 BC, and he believes that some of the Magi were of Jewish descent, perhaps a Jewish remnant from Daniel's day. So, Larson has come up with these 9 qualities of the star based on the Matthew 2 story. The first, it signified birth. The second, it signified kingship. The third, it had a connection with the Jewish nation. The fourth, it must rise in the east like most other stars. The fifth, it appeared at an exact time. The sixth, Herod didn't know when it appeared. The seventh, it endured over time. The eighth, it went ahead of them when they traveled from Jerusalem to Bethlehem. And the ninth, it stopped over Bethlehem. Now, I highlighted number 7. Larson believes the Magi followed the star from the east to Jerusalem, from Babylon or wherever they were to Jerusalem. A plain reading of the verses in Matthew do not state that the star endured over time or that it led the Magi to Jerusalem during their journey. It only states that they saw the star in the east and it reappeared on their way from Jerusalem to Bethlehem. And point number 8's in yellow because if the star was leading the Magi, why didn't it take the Magi straight to Bethlehem instead of going through Jerusalem? Some of the verses that Larson uses are Genesis 49. This is where it's talking about the Lion of Judah. The scepter will not depart from Judah. And then he uses Revelation 12, 1 through 5. This is where a woman is clothed with the sun, with the moon at her feet, with a crown of 12 stars, and gives birth to a son, a male child who will rule the earth with an iron scepter. An iron scepter is an ornamental staff or pole that's carried by a ruler on ceremonial occasions as a symbol of their authority. Larson uses Starry Night software to look at the sky in Babylon in the few years of our Julian calendar that we call before Christ. He looked for unusual planet-to-planet and planet-to-star movements. Larson believes that the wandering king star Jupiter starts a triple conjunction or royal dance in September 3 BC with the fixed star, king star Regulus. A triple conjunction is that Jupiter passed by this star 3 times very close in the sky. He believes that this would have alerted the Magi that something special is being conveyed in the heavens, and that Larson claims this triple conjunction would have formed a halo that signaled a coronation for the King of Kings. This is stellarium software showing what the skies would have looked like for the Magi over Babylon, which is near modern-day Baghdad, Iraq. And note that I've left the constellation lines in here because otherwise you'd be looking at pretty much blue with a few white specks and wouldn't know what you're looking at. The date and time are in the lower right corner on all these slides that I show. You can see that this snip is from September 1st, 3 BC. This is in the early morning, so around 4:41 a.m. Leo is the constellation representing the Jewish people. Jupiter is the wandering king star. Regulus is the fixed king star and the brightest star in Leo. And here Jupiter is moving eastward or to the left on your screen. Here I zoomed in on the first conjunction when Jupiter was closest to Regulus. The date is September 11th, 3 BC, around 11:30 p.m. local time. The magnification is about 5 times. The separation of the planet and the star was such that they both could still be distinguished as separate objects to the naked eye. And this telescope image zoom is 50 times magnification and shows you how close the two objects are in conjunction. The field of view here is 1 degree, which is about the width of 2 full moons. This is a snip from the Star Bethlehem DVD where Larson is using Starry Night software to explain the triple conjunction. The red line is tracing the movement of Jupiter during the triple conjunction over a period of about 8 months. I have Jupiter in orange and Regulus in white. Now keep in mind that Regulus is moving westward 1 degree each night as it rotates around, as the Earth rotates around the sun. The first triple conjunction happens on September 11th, 3 BC, as per the previous slide. This is the closest that the Jupiter approaches Regulus. Jupiter is moving to the west from west to east. At some point later, Jupiter stops its eastward motion, and this is called retrograde motion. This is when, because we're going around the sun and they're going around the sun in the same directions, at some points in times it appears that we overtake them, so they go the other direction. So the first apparent retrograde stop, then Jupiter passes by Regulus a second time on February 12th, 2 BC, moving from east to west. The second apparent stop occurs several weeks later in March, and Jupiter moves eastward again. The third conjunction occurs on May 10th, 2 BC, and so here's how all 3 of the conjunctions would look lined up with respect to Regulus. And per Larson, the triple conjunction indicates to the Magi that Jupiter was crowning Regulus, indicating that a new king was to be born soon. Next, Larson uses Revelation 12 to justify the theory of the Star of Bethlehem. Here, Larson associates the constellation of Virgo the Virgin with the woman in Revelation 12, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet and a crown of 12 stars on her head. This is the stellarium software looking from Baghdad, Iraq on September 11th, 3 BC at 8:30 in the morning. You can see that Virgo is rising on the eastern sky, clothed in the sun with the new moon at her feet. This is what Larson states in his video about this. When Jupiter and Regulus were first meeting, she rose clothed in the sun. As John said, the moon was at her feet. It was a new moon, symbolically birthed at the feet of the Virgin. Larson claims that the woman in verse 1 was the Virgin Mary. The child was Jesus, and the dragon mentioned in the verse was Herod, and that John uses these verses to describe the birth of Jesus. This is where I take issue with Larson's interpretation of Revelation 12. John never states that the woman in verse 1 was a virgin. Yes, the child represents Jesus, but from my online expository scriptural research, the dragon represents Satan, as clearly stated in verse 9, that ancient serpent called the devil, or Satan, who leads the world astray. And a proper interpretation of these verses is the woman represents the nation of Israel, or the Jewish people. These verses aren't about Mary giving birth to Jesus, but rather it describes the struggle between the Jewish nation and Satan. Larson wonders then, if September 11th, 3 BC is the conception date of Jesus, then what is happening in the sky 9 months later in June of 2 BC? So Larson continues to follow Jupiter's eastward movement in 2 BC and notices that Jupiter and Venus have an extremely close conjunction on June 17th, 2 BC. Larson claims that this is the brightest star anyone alive at the time had ever seen. And Larson believes that this date, June 17th, 2 BC, was the birthday of Jesus. And the extremely close conjunction is a sign the Magi have been waiting for, so they planned their journey to Jerusalem. This is what the Magi would have seen looking west after sunset on June 17th, 2 BC. Leo is setting over here, and Jupiter and Venus are very bright right below Leo. Here I zoom in about 10x on it, on Jupiter and Venus. You can see that they are extremely close and appear as a single object. The two brightest stars in the night sky at the time were less than 1/4 the width of the moon. Here's how close they would have been and appeared to the Magi had they had the luxury of a telescope with 78x magnification. You can see Venus is right on the very edge of Jupiter and its 4 Galilean moons. Now, as amazing as this conjunction appeared to the wise men, it would have only lasted a short period of time before the two planets set. The next day, Venus would be at least 2 moon distances away from Jupiter at sunset. And we have to assume that this day was not a cloudy evening, because then they wouldn't have seen it at all. Larson believes that the Magi journeyed from their home in the east to Jerusalem shortly after that June 17th, 2 BC Jupiter and Venus conjunction. He estimates that the Magi arrived in Jerusalem in early December 2 BC, either December 1st or December 2nd, and they met with Herod. Larson states in the DVD, to qualify as the star, Jupiter would have to have been ahead of the Magi as they trekked south from Jerusalem to Bethlehem. And sure enough, in December of 2 BC, if the Magi looked south in the wee hours, in the early morning, there hung the planet of the kings over the city of the Messiah's birth. Furthermore, Larson states, on December 25th of 2 BC, as it entered retrograde, Jupiter reached full stop in its travel through the fixed stars. Magi viewing Jerusalem would have seen it stop in the sky above the little town of Bethlehem. Therefore, Larson believes that the Magi depart Bethlehem early on the morning of December 25th, 2 BC, the first Christmas. This date happens to correspond with the date proposed by Ernest L. Martin in his 1991 book. This is what the sky would have looked like around 5:45 a.m. on the morning of December 25th, BC, looking south from Jerusalem towards Bethlehem. Jupiter, you can see over this, hard to see, appears to stop its eastward motion. So according to Larson, this is the day the Magi found Jesus in a house in Bethlehem and worshipped him. But why would the Magi wait 23 days? They arrived in Jerusalem the beginning of the month. Why would they wait 23 days before departing from Jerusalem to the 6 miles south, a 2-hour camel ride to Bethlehem? That part doesn't make sense to me unless Herod intentionally delayed the Magi in telling the Magi that the king was born in Bethlehem. So to summarize the Star of Bethlehem, Larson believes in his theory of the star that he believes the star was Jupiter. The behavior of Jupiter's passing close to the king's star Regulus in September of 3 BC marked the conception of Jesus. The triple conjunction, royal crowning of Regulus, signaled to the Magi that the Jewish Messiah was to be born soon. Then the Jupiter-Venus conjunction on June 17, 2 BC marked the birth of Jesus. The Magi arrived in Jerusalem in early December of 2 BC and met with Herod. And then the Magi arrived in Bethlehem on December 25th, 2 BC, making it the first Christmas. I was awed by Larson's theory when I first heard it back in 2005 and saw him give it in person. However, after diving deeper into the premises and assumptions during this study, I am not convinced that Jupiter was the star described in Matthew. The Magi would have been very familiar with the wandering star Jupiter and probably would have related it to more of a Persian king, not a Jewish king, and hence it would not have even qualified to them as his star that rose in the east. And so I talked to John earlier. I'd like to take 2 questions in between each of these talks. So you guys got a mic ready to go?
All this talk about the star and all this is a biblical account.
Correct.
And the Jews are waiting for the Messiah King to appear.
Correct.
I believe that the birth of Christ, the death, burial, resurrection of Christ were Jewish events. And So it should be looked at from a Jewish calendar, not the Gregorian calendar, Julian-Gregorian calendar.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
But none of these.
You can correlate the Julian calendar to the Jewish calendars, and people have done that as part of my online research. It's there. It's out there. So they do.
Are you going to present that at all in this?
I'm not going to go over the Jewish calendar at all, but I am going to go over two more explanations, and then I'll give the Psalm 19 astronomy one, which will be different.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Another question?
Yes, real quick.
Okay. All right, now we turn to the second scholarly work, The Great Christ Comet, Revealing the True Star of Bethlehem by former University of Cambridge theologian Colin Nichol. There's a saying that you can't judge a book by its cover. In this case, you can, because the title and cover art reveal the contents of the book. Nichol believes that the star was an extraordinary comet. What drew my attention to this 2015 book was a glowing online review by Guillermo Gonzalez, assistant professor of astronomy at Ball State University and co-author of the book, The Privileged Planet. The back cover of the first three pages of the book list a total of 16 endorsements and accolades, and some pretty heavy hitters. You got J.P. Moreland, John Lennox, Paul Maier, and then astronomers Duncan Steele, Mark Bailey, and Martin Gaskell. With such glowing reviews and endorsements, I had to get the book and read it for myself. Chapter 1 of the book starts out like this. The Bethlehem star is, without doubt, the most famous and celebrated astronomical entity in history. No other celestial object captures the attention of the world like it, particularly at Christmas time. The enormous fascination is found among Christians and non-Christians, young and old, and most peoples of the world. Nichol spent several years studying astronomy. His background is theology, but he spent several years studying astronomy and colluding with astronomers to understand the star candidates. He provides a detailed astronomical discussion of each of the star candidates and his reasons why he rejects them. He used advanced comet simulation software to select the comet type that filled the star movements requirements from the Matthew story. The book is well researched and heavily footnoted. Chapter 5 has a solid scientific explanation of the physics of comets, and Nichol's wife Saoirse provided excellent comet movement graphics throughout the book. Here are some of the great comets that Nichol included in Chapter 5. There was the great comet of 1657 as drawn in Prague. I would have loved to have seen that one. Look how amazing that thing looks. Then there was the great southern comet from Melbourne, Australia in 1880. It's a wood print, so it's not as impressive. Here is the 1881 comet over France. And then lastly, the 1910 comet over Egypt, drawn by H.P. Wilkins, that was visible in the daytime. And you see how the tail kind of spreads out? That's an important part of comets. It's important to understand the characteristics of comets to comprehend why Nichol believes a comet is the top candidate for the star. Comets are composed mostly of ice, dust, and rocks. They're irregularly shaped, and their sizes ranges from a few miles to tens of miles. And right now there's Comet Leonard that you'll be able to see starting December 18th in the southern sky. That real bright object you see at sunset is Venus. Well, below Venus in the sunset, you'll be able to see a comet. Of course, the Magi wouldn't have known anything about the composition of comets. Comets typically arrive in our night sky as a diffuse ball that develops two tails the closer it approaches the sun. They don't have a tail when they are far from the sun, as in point 0 here on the diagram. The tails tend to get longer and brighter the closer the comet approaches the sun. So you can see that the tail grows as you move from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, and then starts to shrink at 5 and 6 as it's moving away from the sun. The bluish tail is ionized by the solar wind and always points away from the sun. The white-yellow tail, or dust tail, typically points away from the sun too. It is denser, so it gets bent and smeared backwards, as you saw in that Wilkins painting, to the comet's direction by the comet's gravity and the solar forces. Comets can move forward or backwards in relation to the background stars. This is an online diagram of Comet Neowise from the summer of 2020. Who here had a chance to see that? Okay, a couple of you. I managed to see it and also take some photographs of it. It wasn't that impressive. So this irregular movement helps Nichol to explain his thesis that the comet appears in a pre-dawn sky and guides the Magi to Jerusalem. Then the comet leads them from Jerusalem to Bethlehem. The verses that Nickel uses are Numbers 24:7. This is Balaam's prophecy about a star coming out of Jacob, a scepter out of Israel. He also uses Isaiah 7:14 about the virgin will conceive and give birth, and they'll call him Emmanuel. And he uses, like Larson, Revelation 12:1-5. Here he really focuses on the last part, a male child who will rule all the earth with an iron scepter. He believes that the scepter there is talking about a large comet tail. So, Larson adheres to a 4 BC death of Herod instead of 1 BC. So his time frame of the star is 6 to 5 BC. And Larson believes the star was a narrowly inclined, retrograde, long-period comet. That's a mouthful. What that means is that the comet approaches the sun at a narrow angle. Retrograde means it moves backwards in relation to the stars. And long period means it's longer than 200 years. Halley's comet has an orbit of 78 years. The Christ comet, Nickel believes, is on the order of thousands of years, and so far it has not revisited us yet. Nickel claims that the comet first appeared as a pre-dawn heliacal rising and then later reappeared in the evening sky and eventually in the southern sky, pointing the way to the house where the toddler Jesus was. Recall that a heliacal rising is in the east just before sunrise. He estimates that it took the Magi 28 to 37 days to travel from Babylon to Jerusalem. They must have been taking the Jerusalem Express lane to get there so quickly. Nickel dates the birth of Jesus as October 20th, 6 BC, and the visit of the Magi in late November, 6 BC. He references the Hale-Bopp comet, which is probably more brighter, which maintained naked eye visibility for 18 months. And this is kind of what it looked like over San Diego, only not quite that much because this is a long exposure, so it would have been a little bit fainter than this. He makes two very bold statements regarding the great Christ comet. The first is this: the Christ comet has all the marks of a truly great comet. Indeed, its greatness supersedes those of any other comet in history. It is quite simply the greatest of the great historical comets. And he says, after perihelion, that's when the comet has come around the backside of the sun and is heading away, on October 20th, 6 BC, it seems to have sported an impressively long tail that caused the comet as a whole to look like an iron scepter that stretched from the eastern horizon all the way to the western horizon. The tail would have stretched across the entire dome of the sky for a few days after this. This is my sketch using Stellarium software and then my iPad of what Nickel is describing in this horizon-to-horizon comet. It would have been impressive. Recall that Nickel uses Revelation 12 to claim that the Apostle John was using apocalyptic language to show that the stars foretold the birth of Jesus. Nickel makes a leap that his comet represented the birth and gestation of Jesus. The typical image that we have of Virgo, the woman standing here, is seen from a zodiacal image. She's standing. Nickel researches the various portrayals of Virgo in the ancient Middle East and finds one from Tukros of Babylon in the 1st century BC that has Virgo sitting on a throne. So Nickel selected the sitting Virgo to better align with his perceived movement of the great comet. Nickel's perceived path of the comet is a little hard to see here, but it's the green line. It starts in the upper right at September 20th and goes all the way to September 30th to October 20th, 6 BC. He believes that Jesus was born on October 20th, 6 BC. Nickel claims that the conception of Jesus was around September 15, 6 BC. So there are only 35 days of gestation there to his birth. I'm not sure why Nickel compresses the 9-month pregnancy into 35 days, unless it's another one of God's miracles. The Magi departed Babylon around October 23rd, 6 BC, and followed the comet to Jerusalem. And then they arrived in Bethlehem in late November 6 BC. Nickel writes in chapter 11 about the comet, moreover, its long tail stretched across much of the evening night sky for the 28 to 37 days that the Magi were journeying from Babylon to Jerusalem, seeming to go before them in the west. This large bright comet that would have been visible to everyone in the northern hemisphere, not just Babylon and Jerusalem, and parts of the southern hemisphere during these 28 to 37 days, Herod and the Jewish leaders would have noticed the comet throughout Israel. It wouldn't have been a surprise to anyone. Anyway, after meeting with Herod, secretly, Herod sends the Magi on their way to Bethlehem. Nicholl claims the comet is now in the southern sky, pointing directly to Jesus' house in Bethlehem. And this is Saoirse Nicholl's depiction of the book cover of the great comet pointing directly to the house where the child Jesus was staying in late November of 6 BC. So some weaknesses that I see is there's no historical record from any of the major civilizations that recorded astronomy. Babylon, the Jewish nation, Chinese, etc. There's no manuscripts or tablets of a comet so big that it stretched from horizon to horizon. And many civilizations would have formulated a legend of such a great comet, much like there's flood legends all over the place. And then Herod and the Jewish leaders would have noticed this comet throughout Israel. It wouldn't have been a surprise to anyone. Even Guillermo Gonzalez, who I mentioned at the beginning, the assistant professor of astronomy, he said this: "So, has Nicholl finally solved the mystery of the star? I'm tempted to say he has, but until an independent reference to the Christ comet is discovered in the historical record, I would have to call his theory a speculative historical reconstruction, albeit a sophisticated one that may be the most plausible offered to date. Historians take note. Even a single mention of a comet appearing at a certain date in a particular constellation consistent with Nicholl's story would be enough to confirm it." So to summarize Nicholl's great Christ comet, he believes the star was a narrowly inclined, retrograde, long-period comet. It was the greatest comet ever seen. It first appeared in Virgo's womb and was a sign interpreted by the Magi as the birth of the newborn Jewish king. The comet was visible from horizon to horizon and alerted the Magi to depart for Jerusalem. The Magi followed the comet west to Jerusalem. After meeting with Herod, they followed the comet south to Bethlehem, where it stood over the house where Jesus was staying. And he estimated the birth of Jesus on October 20th, 6 BC, and the Magi visit in late November, 6 BC. I had high hopes for Colin Nicholl's book, largely due to the endorsements and accolades. But his use of phenomenal language to describe the comet and the lack of any historical record or cultural legends for such an amazing comet have left me with too many unanswered questions. I would thus classify the great Christ comet as a speculative, historical, semi-fictional account of the Star of Bethlehem. And we're at the next point for questions.
So if you have a question, raise your hand. I do have a quick question about that one. So one of the criticisms is that there's no ancient references to a comet during that period.
Correct.
That could validate this. So
Correct.
in ancient historical documents, how many references to comets are there, and how many of those are known comets that can be tracked via astronomical software?
There's quite a few. Most, as you can imagine, most of the ancient records are incomplete. But the Chinese, the Babylonians, and others, they have quite a few. And comets were always notified. There's even, you'll see in the next one, where there was a Korean one in 5 BC that was notified, a brush star. That's what they call the comets. So there's quite a bit, but then at the same time, there's big gaps in them. In the story, for example, a lot of the tablets for Babylon, they're clay tablets, and they were stored in London. And then there was a great flood, and a lot of the tablets became sand. So there's holes through there, but there's really not enough. From my perspective, I would expect for something, you saw that drawing, from east to western horizon, something that amazing, there would have been cultural legends everywhere, much like the flood story. And so I think that's part of what's lacking in Collins Nicholl's assertion.
Excellent.
Got one question over here.
Hi, thank you for your information. So you mentioned earlier with the Larson summary that Herod didn't exactly recognize, this phenomenon in the sky, and you kind of made this point apparent that if the comet were as obvious as this author has indicated,
Right.
he surely would have seen that, and I completely agree with that. But my question is going back to the first summary, was that such a nuanced astronomical phenomena that only those, learned astronomers were able to detect that, and so it escaped Herod's attention, or is it something else?
So one of the things you got to keep in mind is that Babylon was one of the earlier places where they kept very detailed astronomical records. And in the Magi, part of their job was to create star charts and star tables predicting the next year or two or whatever, kind of like that old farmer's almanac that I mentioned. I'm not sure that in the Jewish community that they had the same kind of emphasis on that, primarily because, as I mentioned, the Old Testament prohibits worshiping anything up in the sky. But they would have seen the triple conjunction there. I mean, Babylon is really only about 300 miles straight across the desert, or whatever, 300 or 400 miles from Jerusalem, so that just an hour later they'd see pretty much the same thing. So they would have seen the triple conjunction, they would have seen the Jupiter-Venus conjunction, permitting that the skies were clear. And so I think there's just less of an emphasis in the Jewish community on those types of heavenly signals. Now, there's a reason why in Babylon there was, because if you remember, I'm going to talk about it in a minute, the book of Daniel. Daniel was a captive, a Jewish captive in Babylon, and he's the one that was the dream interpreter on that. And so many of the Magi are believed to be descendants or remnants of Daniel. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay. All right, I'm going to move on to the next one.
There was one more there.
I'm only taking two.
Okay.
I can save it for the end. In the interest of time, my 55 minutes doesn't include the question section, by the way. All right. Now I will review the RTB perspective. Here's an image from a 2019 Culture Talk video of Dr. Hugh Ross and Sandra Demos. Dr. Ross has posted several articles on RTB's website dating back to 2002. In the 2002 article, Dr. Ross states that he made the first study of the Matthew star back when he was in high school, when he was director of observations for the Vancouver chapter of the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada. Did you pick up on that? He's in high school and he's the director of observations. Brilliant man. He gave a lecture on the Star of Bethlehem in which he argued that the star was a recurring nova. In this video, Dr. Ross states that a direct reading of the verses in Matthew tell us the following. It was a single object, a star. It appeared to the Magi who were in the east and then disappeared. It reappeared to the Magi when they were on their way from Jerusalem to Bethlehem, so all this is just kind of rehashing. The star stopped over the home where Jesus was staying. RTB adheres to a 4 BC as the year that Herod died, and so Ross believes that the star likely appeared in either 7 or 6 BC. He believes it was either a cataclysmic variable star, meaning a very explosive variable star, or a recurring nova. There is a Korean historical record of a new brush star that appeared in 5 BC. The Magi mentioned in the book of Daniel were educated wise men of standing, so they would have been aware of the book of Daniel. Daniel is the only book in the Bible that predicts the timing of the coming of the Messiah. This is where it talks in chapter 9 about the vision that Daniel has of the 77s, or roughly 490 years. So 6 BC is a good time for the Magi to start looking at the night sky. And a recurring nova would be the same star in the same constellation and the same approximate brightness appearing about 2 years apart. Dr. Ross proposes a short-term recurrent nova as a possible candidate because it couldn't have been spectacular because the shepherds keeping flock by night were unaware of any unusual celestial object. Herod and the religious leaders weren't aware of the star. It cannot be a bright comet, a supernova, a planet, because they would have been seen by Herod and the Jewish leaders. It's also not a bright object because it was only recorded by Matthew and not by any of the civilizations, the Egyptians, the Babylonians, etc. And it couldn't be a conjunction, as they are, as I mentioned previously, relatively common. So he believes that it's a recurring nova. A nova or guest star are not as bright and could go unnoticed. They reappear in the same location in a constellation in the night sky. Novas don't move in relation to the background stars. They move with them. They can reappear months for short term and years for long term later. They can be observed centuries later by the remnants of their explosions. We can see the infrared signals. And it's possible that the Magi noticed the nova and it wasn't noticed by Herod's astrologer. Thus, the nova could reappear on their way to Bethlehem unnoticed too. So, to explain what Dr. Ross is proposing, I used the Stellarium software to go back to 6 BC and look at the sky from Babylon. The Magi have been scanning the night sky for months now, waiting to see the star that would signal the birth of the Jewish Messiah, because they knew about the 77s, the 490 years. Leo is a heliacal rising on the eastern horizon just before sunrise on August 12th, 6 BC. This snip is from 4:28 a.m. Suppose a nova appears, and I've got it exaggerated here. Now I'm going to take away the constellation lines. This is what the sky would have looked like, right? Can't see much there, huh? The nova probably could have been as bright as any of these stars that I have circled over here. Therefore, it could easily go unnoticed in Jerusalem. And then here's the nova that I have in Leo right over here. If it's a typical recurring nova, it will start to fade a few days later. And so here we are a month later on September 12, 6 BC. Leo is now higher in the sky at the same time because Earth has moved 1/12 the distance around the sun, or about 30 degrees. This is the star the Magi have been looking for, and now they know now that the Messiah has been born. They start to make arrangements to quickly depart for Bethlehem, or for Jerusalem, sorry. Fast forward 4 months to January 12, 5 BC. Leo is now switched from an early morning to now rising on the eastern horizon in the early evening at about 6:30 p.m. Note that the nova has completely disappeared and faded to the naked eye by now. Now we move to March 12th of 5 BC. Leo is high in the sky and almost directly over Bethlehem, looking south at 8:30 p.m. from Jerusalem. Then the nova reappears as the Magi head to Bethlehem. Back when Dr. Ross was a teenager, the shortest recurrent nova cycle was around 10 years, so it was hard to qualify. Recent astronomical discoveries have found one in the Andromeda Galaxy, our closest galactic neighbor, that has been recurring with a period of only 1 year. And following this discovery, a team of astronomers have demonstrated that a certain kind of white dwarf star could exhibit recurring nova eruptions with a period as short as 2 months. And over the past summer, there's been a couple that have been visible if you follow any of the astronomy websites. Dr. Ross had this to say about the Magi who followed the star. What strikes me as the most important point of the story is its illustration of the hope the Magi placed in the promised Messiah. When I consider the magnitude of their commitment of time, energy, and treasure to seeking him out in order to bow before him, I pray that my response and yours will match theirs. I really admire Dr. Ross's humbleness. So to summarize RTB's position, Dr. Ross believes that Herod's death was in 4 BC, so the birth of Jesus was in 6 or 5 BC. RTB's position is that the star was a single object, a short-term recurring nova. The nova alerted the Magi to travel to Jerusalem. The Magi had to ask Herod where the newborn king was. And the nova appeared a second time as the Magi traveled from Jerusalem to Bethlehem. RTB's position on the star is a cautious one. Dr. Ross rightfully states that we just don't have enough information from those 12 verses or extra biblical stuff to conclusively identify the star. I do think that the recurring nova has more merit over the other two that I just presented because a recurring nova would qualify as a new star and therefore his star that rose in the east. It would fade away after several days and then could reappear as the Magi depart from Jerusalem. So now we're at our third question and answer section. Gives me a chance to have a little bit of Peggy's Diet Dr. Pepper.
Let's go ahead and start with the gentleman who has the last question, John. John? Yeah.
Raise your hand.
All right, there you go. We'll sneak you in.
I think you answered my question with this last thing because it appears that the comet theory could be debunked because the astronomers that Herod hadn't noticed anything in
Correct.
the sky.
Correct.
So neither had any other civilization. So anyway, I was earlier going to ask whether Herod's astronomers or Herod had seen anything in the night sky, and so you just answered that. It's no, right? Okay.
Correct. They did not. They were completely unaware of it. Second question, right over here.
So all three theories talk about the possibility, so a planet conjunction, a comet, or a nova.
Correct.
Are things that we would be seeing again, right? So the only reason that we're saying that these are possible candidates is because of the time frame they happen. But what would be, I guess, the difference if you're an astronomer and that something similar would have happened in the skies again? Is that possible?
Let's see if I understand your question. You're wondering whether the star could reappear?
Yes.
Okay. It is possible, as mentioned. So the things that could reoccur, a comet could. As Nickel thinks, it's a 2,000-year comet or whatever, so we won't see it. We might see it soon. A supernova, it would do it, but a supernova would only erupt one time. And that's the difference between a supernova and a nova. When a supernova erupts, that's it. But a nova has a companion star, and what it's doing is it's continually pulling matter away from the companion star. And when it reaches a certain maximum limit, then it has an eruption. It's bright for a couple days, and then it settles down and starts pulling more. And that's why it can recur. And if you recall, with 50 plus years ago, when Dr. Ross was in high school, 10 years was kind of the earliest that they could see a recurring nova. So that kind of washed his theory away. But science has come into his corner over the years to now where it's as little as 2 months on it. So I don't know if the star could come back in the same way and whether we would recognize it the same, because now we know so much more about it, right? Now we know that they aren't wandering stars, they are planets. And you can see them in our telescopes. Come tonight to Round Rock. And you'll see 3 of them. You see Jupiter, Venus, and Saturn. And they didn't know anything about comets and how comets moved and all that kind of stuff. So does that answer your question? The next section, I think, is going to answer your question even more. Did we get the 2 questions? We got the 2 questions, right? Okay. All right. Okay. The last portion of this presentation will be from the Psalm 19 astronomy perspective. It's my opinion only, and there's no scientific evidence to support it. The perspective that I'm about to present was reached at slowly over the past year of study. I am basing my conclusion on my Christian worldview from 2 Timothy 16:17, where it is written, "All Scripture is God-breathed and is useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training in righteousness, so that the servant of God may be thoroughly equipped for every good work." Therefore, I hold Scripture in the highest regard, higher than Josephus' writings, and believe that Scripture is the infallible Word of God. Many of you are probably familiar with Occam's razor, which, to paraphrase, states that all things being equal, the best explanation of any phenomenon is the one that makes the fewest assumptions. When you look at the Star of Bethlehem for Larson, he builds his story on several assumptions, such as the star was an ordinary planet doing what he believes are extraordinary movements. The star led the wise men to Jerusalem, and Larson assumes that Revelation 12 is speaking about the birth of Jesus with Herod as the dragon. Colin Nichol, on the other hand, in his great Christ comet, assumes that a comet appeared of such amazing brightness that there is no historical record for it. Nichol believes that all of Jerusalem paid no attention to such a comet, and he believes that the comet appeared to stop over the house where Jesus was in Bethlehem. And Dr. Ross seems to avoid making too many assumptions in stating the RTB position of the star, and if you've read any of RTB's material, you'll find out that that's consistent. In fact, Dr. Ross goes out of his way to state that all explanations must be purely speculative. So, with Occam's razor in mind, I present the purely speculative Psalm 19 astronomy perspective. God's fingerprints are everywhere surrounding the birth of Jesus. I believe in miracles. I personally believe that the greatest miracle is God creating this wonderful, amazing universe. His second greatest miracle was sending His Son, the incarnation of Jesus, to save us from our sins. Since the fall of Adam and Eve, the birth pangs of Jesus' birth were written into the Christmas story. And what do I mean about those birth pangs? Well, let's start with the story of Zechariah, which is recorded in Luke 1. The angel Gabriel appeared to Zechariah to tell him that he and Elizabeth were going to have a baby. Zechariah doubts that it's possible for the elderly Elizabeth to have a baby and is punished by being made mute until John is born. It seems that Zechariah has forgotten about Abraham and Sarah. Next, we have in Luke the Annunciation and the Immaculate Conception. The angel Gabriel this time appears to Mary in Elizabeth's 6th month of pregnancy. Gabriel tells Mary, who is a virgin, that she will conceive a baby boy and name him Yahweh, Jesus saves. Next, we have an angel appearing to Joseph in a dream in Matthew 1, telling Joseph not to divorce Mary quietly due to her being pregnant. Despite the appearance of infidelity on Mary's part, the angel tells Joseph to marry her because she wasn't unfaithful to him. And the angel tells Joseph to name the child Jesus because he will save his people from their sins. Next, we have an angel in the heavenly host appearing to the shepherds in Luke 2. Note that the shepherds were considered the lowest of the low, the unclean. And the angel tells them, I bring to you good news that will cause great joy for all the people. Today in the town of Bethlehem of David, a Savior has been born to you. He is the Messiah, the Lord. This will be a sign to you. You will find a baby wrapped in clothes and lying in a manger. And then there's the story of Simeon at the temple consecration in Luke 2. This would have been when Jesus was about 40 days old, where the Holy Spirit revealed to Simeon that the baby Jesus was the Messiah. And then Simeon exclaimed, "For my eyes have seen your salvation, which you have prepared in the sight of all nations, a light for revelation to the Gentiles and the glory of the people of Israel." A light for the revelation to the Gentiles. Think about those verses about bringing a light to the Magi. And then we have the prophetess Anna at the temple in Luke 2, where she says, she gave thanks to God and spoke about the child who all were looking forward to, the redemption of Jerusalem. And we have here in Matthew 2, the Magi being warned in a dream not to go back to Herod. And then finally, we have the escape to Egypt in Matthew 2, where Joseph is ordered in a second dream to take Jesus and Mary and immediately escape to Egypt. This was because Herod was going to murder the firstborn boys under 2 years old in Bethlehem. So you can see God's fingerprints are everywhere in the gospel accounts regarding the birth of Jesus. Each one of these events could be viewed and interpreted as a supernatural or miraculous event. So the thought bouncing around in the back of my head since the last summer has been, if God's fingerprints are everywhere surrounding the birth of Jesus, then why wouldn't God's fingerprints be on the star signaling the birth of his son? So here's my Psalm 19 astronomy take on this. We don't have enough information to know with certainty what the star was, what the identity was. The verses tell us that the star appeared in the east, disappeared, and then reappeared in the south. The star did not guide the Magi to Jerusalem. The Matthew verses do not state the Magi were following the star from Babylon to Jerusalem, as mentioned previously. Whatever it was they saw, they knew it was a sign that had represented the long-awaited, newly born Jewish Messiah. They didn't know where the Messiah was born, so they journeyed to Jerusalem. They were expecting the Messiah to be the son of the current king, so they went to Herod's palace. That's why Herod was unaware of the birth of the Messiah. And I would imagine the Magi were embarrassed at that point to find out that the newborn king wasn't there in Herod. Matthew's story indicates that the star was a single object and appeared on two separate occasions, so that eliminates, in my mind, conjunctions and supernovas. Here's the important part, this verse, Matthew 2:9b. The star they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until they stopped over the place where the child was, and they were overjoyed on seeing it. John Chrysostom in the 4th century put the question of the star stopping this way: how then, tell me, did the star point out a spot so confined just to the space of a manger and shed, unless it left that height and came down and stood over the very head of the young child? So the behavior of the star mentioned in verse 9 is what has confounded experts over the centuries. How can a star stop over any particular place? In my opinion, this verse eliminates all the candidates except for divine intervention. It eliminates Rick Larson's wandering Jupiter star and Colin Nichols' great comet. And it eliminates Dr. Ross's recurring nova. A recurring nova would never stop because it would keep moving 15 degrees every hour through the night sky along with all the other stars. So in my opinion, the star was a miraculous celestial event initiated by God and directed at the Magi. God used the star to notify them that a new king of the Jews was born. God was using the Magi to tell the world that he was going to bring salvation to all peoples and all nations through the birth of his son, Jesus Christ. The Gentiles, like the shepherds, were considered lowly among the Jewish leaders and King Herod. Note how God never told Herod about Jesus' birth, and how he apparently never told the Jewish leaders that Jesus was born. This is in line with Jesus' subsequent preaching on the first being last and the last being first in the kingdom of God. So, returning to our Stellarium software one last time with the Magi on the road from Jerusalem to Bethlehem. It's a 6-mile camel ride. The date and time are uncertain, but Leo is high in the sky. They see a star and they are overjoyed. God used the star to lead the Magi to Bethlehem. Then something miraculous occurs. A beam of light from heaven then shines over one house, the house where Jesus was staying, just like you would see on those Christmas cards. It's almost as if God put up a celestial neon sign saying, "Look here, this is my son in whom I am well pleased. Worship him." So, to summarize the Psalm 19 astronomy perspective, God's fingerprints are all over the gospel story surrounding the birth of Jesus. God used angels and dreams to signal the birth of our Savior. The Magi's journey was triggered by a miraculous star seen only by the Magi before sunrise. The miraculous star reappeared as the Magi were headed on the 6-mile journey to Bethlehem. The star then apparently appears to stop over the house of Bethlehem where Jesus was staying. And lastly, God used the Magi to reveal to the world his plan of salvation to all people in all nations. My final thoughts on this study over the past year. The star is one of those marvelous biblical mysteries. We will never know with certainty what the star was until we ask the angels when we get to heaven. The star is not as important, though, to Christians as is the empty tomb. For as Paul tells us in 1 Corinthians 15:17, if Christ had not been raised, our faith is futile, and we are all still in our sins. The identity of the Christmas star may be good conversation starters with non-believers, but there's a caveat. There's significant evidence for Jesus' life, his crucifixion, and his resurrection. Proof that the star identity is unlikely to convince believers of the birth of Jesus if they don't accept the volumes of evidence regarding his life, death on the cross, and the empty tomb. So that's the end of my talk. Merry Christmas. I've got a table here. It's an eye chart. Engineers always have to throw at least one eye chart up there. Thank you for your attention. And I think at this point, as is tradition, we defer to our most excellent club president for the first post question. Okay, the question was, since they weren't Jewish, why did they make this long, arduous, and expensive journey there? I think it gets back to my summary here, right? So God's plan at the start was he picked one nation, the Jewish people, to be his people. And then out of them, he was going to bring salvation to everyone. So he picked the Magi, who were remnants and were familiar with the Jewish people. There was probably a large Jewish population in Babylon, in that area, so they were familiar with it. So he used them to bring salvation to the rest of the world. So it's not limited. God's in the soul-saving business, as Dr. Ross likes to say. And right now we have 8 billion people on this planet that he wants to save every one of them.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
Right here.
Good.
This kind of follows on that same one. I mean, from sermons I've heard, I get the picture that Israel was kind of well known. And so consider if America continues its dive that it's taking right now, and people in France still remember that all those markers on the beach are American soldiers. People are still happy about our past, which was somewhat heroic and even miraculous, but the rest of the world sees us in degradation. Now, is that where Israel was right then? It was widely known that God had blessed them in the past, but they just saw something that was despicable now. But they had a past that everybody knew about. Is that the situation?
I don't think it's the same situation. If you remember that, so Israel was devastated in the 580s or whatever, BC or whatever, and then Nehemiah rebuilt the temple walls and the walls around Jerusalem. And so at this point in time, Jerusalem and the Israelites, they were under subjugation of the Roman Empire, right? So Herod was really just a sitting figurehead. He wasn't what you would call a Jewish leader, but he was in cahoots with a lot of the Jewish leaders, right? And they feared, when you continue on with the story, they feared what Jesus was telling the people. So I don't see the parallels to what's going on right now. I'm not one to look at that kind of a biblical prophecy. I don't see it, but maybe we can have that discussion offline at lunch. Second question from you. All right.
Yeah, this has really piqued my curiosity. I think you've helped me better understand kind of the two observations of the star. And so my first question you actually answered, and that was...
I love presentations where I answer everyone's question.
Whenever, when you started the presentation, I was wondering about, how did the Magi know to go to Jerusalem? Was the star, over Jerusalem, and they followed that direction? And so you seem to imply that, in fact, they saw the star, but given their prior knowledge from, Daniel and the remnants, they went to Jerusalem not knowing,
Right.
thinking that they would find the answer there.
Correct.
And so when they were there and they presented that to Herod, who was unaware of the situation, then the second occurrence of the star appeared, and they followed that directly to, the manger.
A little modification on that. As they were heading towards the 6 miles south to Bethlehem is when the star appeared. Okay, so and then they followed the star at that point, and the star stopped over the house. That's what I get from the reading of Matthew 2, at least from the NIV. Does that answer your question?
Yes, sir. Thank
Okay.
you.
All right, Nick.
So this is yes, I understand miracles, but when we're in scientific explanations, the miracle occurs here, and answer is in some regards unsatisfactory.
Right, it's not scientific.
It's not scientific.
But then supernatural events are outside of the natural world, so they would be not scientific.
So obviously they're asking Herod, so where is this supposed to be happening? He says, about 6 miles south of here.
He doesn't tell them right away, right? There's a gap. There's a time gap. We don't know how big.
Okay, so I guess that really is sort of the question.
Yeah.
Is between that and when that star appears, because supposedly they're already on their way to Bethlehem when the star reappears.
Correct.
So-
They depart as soon as they depart Jerusalem, is my understanding. They see it.
So is this a case where is there something perhaps meteorologically star cover or something they don't see it? How does this star within space of an hour or two?
Let me answer your question. 2 weeks ago, I had a slightly different ending to this presentation. 2 weeks ago, I was under the belief that it was a recurring nova, right? Just like RTB. So the recurring nova appeared as they were on their 6-mile journey south, 2-hour camel ride. But then something like a light pillar, and that's a meteorological phenomenon where you can get a straight beam of light that can happen that people can see, and you just Google it on Google light pillar, and you'll see what I'm talking about. And so that's kind of what I was leaning towards 2 weeks ago. But then as I studied it more, it dawned on me that I showed those 8 different miracles. You got all these miracles going along, so God didn't need to do something funky that we have to explain from our perspective. It's back to the question that was asked over here. This is a supernatural event that happened, right? The whole thing going back to the fall of Adam and Eve, that's part of the birth pangs that was happening all this time. So God was just stepping in, as he does all the time, into our universe and just showing a sign. I kind of think that night that the angel Gabriel was busy holding some big bright light.
So, great information, and thank you so much for all the work that you put into this. Just with all your scholarly research, you're a great person to ask about the issue of how did the 3 kings get involved? These are probably 3 more scientists, astronomers, and then there's 3 wise men who's used to describe these. So how did that change, or why would be correct there or not correct? And also, can you comment on the choice of the 3 gifts that were mentioned in Scripture? What does that imply about what they're expecting to see when they get there?
Man, that's 2 questions, and they're pretty loaded there. All right, so if I understand the first one, why is it that there's 3 wise men? We don't know how many there were. That's something that was just formulated through the church and through legends and all that kind of stuff over time. One thing we can state is, remember, Herod and all of Jerusalem were alarmed because this wasn't just like, 3 wise men and maybe 10 companions on this thing. This would have probably been 200, 300, 400 people. This was a very expensive caravan that was coming through there. And so when they showed up unannounced, Herod was really surprised, right, on it. So the Bible doesn't tell us how many. There was legends that formulated, I think, in the 600s and 700s, where you had they called them 3 kings, and they gave like Belshazzar, and I can't remember their 3 names on the spot right now. But that's just all legend, and it probably comes because they presented 3 gifts. And this is the second part of your question, right? You got gold, myrrh, and frankincense, right? So gold is for the richness. The frankincense is actually an embalming type of material, powder or whatever, and then the myrrh. And I think a lot of online discussions or talks that I saw, they mentioned how those things, at least 2 of the 3, are things that would be part of someone's death, so preparation for someone's death. So it's kind of like they came up in saying along the same time, yes, you will have wealth, but, here's the materials that you're going to need for your burial type thing. I don't know if that, okay.
Anybody else?
Okay.
My understanding is the wise men might have had some Jewish scriptures with them, so they would know that Bethlehem would be involved. So that's why they could go to Bethlehem after going to Jerusalem. Is that a possibility?
I hadn't seen that much. We do know that a lot of people, they believe they were priestly members that followed Zoroaster, so they're either Persia or Media kind of area in that Fertile Crescent over there. They would have been very familiar, everyone agrees they would have been very familiar with the book of Daniel and the prophecies. And so that's the reason why they're looking at that. It's complicated to go and look online, but that 490 years gets changed because back in the time of Daniel, their calendar was 360 days, not 365, so you got to make all these kind of changes and stuff. But when you look at it, they were scanning the sky about that time. They were expecting. So even though they were not themselves Jewish, they were very well versed because they had learned it at one of, if you read Daniel 9, the best of the prophets, at least in their time in Babylon. So the second part of your question is, why they already knew about about Bethlehem. I'm not sure I read anything about that part of it, but it's clear that they had to stop and ask directions. Now, I don't know if they were doing that just as a courtesy call, right? But they didn't know. If you read the direct readings, they didn't know until Herod told them. Now, some of the reading that I looked at, they showed up, and Herod and all of Jerusalem was alarmed, and then Herod looks at his priestly leaders, right, and the religious leaders, and says, where is this child to be born? And there's a gap of time. They didn't know off the top of their head. They had to go research and read, and they came back and told them in Bethlehem of Judea. But then you notice right after that, Herod met secretly with the Magi to find out the exact time that the star rose, right? So he didn't know, and they didn't know the exact time of birth on it. And that's why when you look following, I didn't read through the slaughter of the innocents, but the reason why when the Magi were told in a dream not to report back to Herod, a few days later, a few months later or whatever, he realized they weren't coming back, and so he went out and had those slaughtered that were 2 years and younger, the first male 2 years and younger. So does that kind of answer your question? Okay. How many more questions, Don?
I guess we'll see. We'll start with
Okay.
this one. We'll go until I get bored.
I think you may have answered this indirectly already, but there's no mention in messianic prophecies of the star or the Magi or any of this event, is there?
There are a few. I think I touched on one. I can't remember if it was in Numbers or not, but there is a star will come out of Judah. So there's a couple of mentions of stars. They're not necessarily directly pointing to the Messiah, but kind of indirectly on there. So that there is some of that. It's kind of interesting. The thing that I found interesting in the last 2 weeks going through my head was that in John it tells us that Jesus is the light of the world, right? And the darkness tried to overcome the light and wasn't able to, right? And this is Jesus, the light of the world, telling the Gentiles through the Magi, right, which that, hey, the light of the world's coming to everyone. But there are a few mentions. There's some apocryphal gospels, the Gospel of Jane that mentions the star. In fact, in the apocryphal one, which means that it's not included in the normal 66 books of the Bible, that one claims it was an amazing star that was visible during the daytime, right? But because it's not accepted as part of Scripture, we can't give it as much weight.
Okay. Anybody else?
You had mentioned a 200 to 300 person caravan, is that?
Fairly large, probably even more, yeah.
Okay, I would be interested in who would be in this, and a comment. I had a pastor once who said, when you present this, the pageant, you may have any number of wise men, but do not have three.
Good point. Yeah, we don't know how many there were. A couple of them, it's believed that a couple of them were very well versed in at least the Old Testament scriptures and clearly the book of Daniel, right? But typically, if you think of where they're going from Babylon, they're probably going up that path I had. They're going up the Fertile Crescent and then coming down along the coast of the Mediterranean over there. That's a pretty long journey. I mean, the 28 to 37 days that Colin Nichol, I'm surprised that Guillermo Gonzalez didn't pick up on that. That just seemed like way too fast, right? But his justification was that they did it during the milder time of the year, and they went straight across the desert, right? So they traveled at night, and they slept during the daytime on it. That's a very good book to read. I mean, I hate to knock the guy. He's very well researched. His comet stuff is really good. The stuff on the star candidates is really good, and I'm surprised no one's asked the question, am I just appealing to the God of the gaps with this Psalm 19 astronomy one? Because he also mentions, was it a miracle? And he says, that's the easiest escape route to that. And then from a scientific perspective, it's not falsifiable, so you can't prove that God didn't do it, right? So,
But who were these extra people?
who are the extra people? It's just their troop. Right? You've got, you're coming on camels, you've got to bring all this food, you got to have people to pitch the tents up and all this kind of stuff during their journey, to go out to the countryside and procure food. And remember, they couldn't bring all their food with them and stuff like that. So it was kind of a long, expensive type journey. There's one that was recorded of similar to that, I believe it was in 70 AD to the new Roman leader that had replaced, I can't remember which one of the Caesars. But there was a large troop that came into Rome for the same type of thing. And so some think that maybe Matthew was aware of that because it's the timing, 70 AD, and he was kind of using that to support part of his story. Okay, but there would have been a larger troop. Think of a circus coming to town, right? You see the main acts, but every person that you see on the stage, there's 10 other people behind them that are supporting them, right?
So you'd imagine this as being sort of a royal sanctioned caravan.
Yes.
And the Magi were just sort of leaders representing the kingdom in Babylon.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Two quick observations. I'll wrap it up with one final question. So, excellent presentation. Really enjoyed the historical background. One of the things I really enjoyed. Oftentimes when I was listening and I would come up with a question, you would then answer that question.
I love it when I do that, John.
So that's really excellent. You need to come up with a catchy name for your theory. Psalm 19 Vegas Spotlight Theory or something.
There you go.
That'll help it resonate with the public. So the question, astronomy in the ancient Near East, I think your average person was probably a far better astronomer than any of us are, because they didn't have Netflix. That was their main form of evening entertainment, if you will. Can you sort of elaborate about that history and how knowledgeable they were and how we know those things?
Yeah, so it really boils down to the astrologers, and that's what they were called, the Magi at the time. Astrology back then wasn't what astrology is today. You don't open up a newspaper and see your generic horoscope for the day type thing. But however, they were always looking for nuances in the night sky. And they were doing that to come up with, as I mentioned, as a way to predict the seasons so that people can know when to plant and all that kind of stuff. They were the experts. And so they would see that and they would be able to chart the planets. That was primarily, the moon and the planets are the main one. The moon's pretty predictable, right? Every 29 3/4 days or whatever, you get a new moon. But the planets move around very strangely, and they would always have to make corrections periodically on that because they would say, okay, we expect that Jupiter's going to rise. Today, Jupiter rises at, we'll say, July 2nd, right, at sunset in the east, right? Next year, it's going to rise on July 15th, right, at sunset. So they could make those kind of predictions, but they always were errors, and they were always having to correct all the time. But they were very, very familiar. And you touched on something else. They didn't have light pollution back then, right? And in one of the other talks I give, like in Jerusalem, people were very familiar with the night sky. When it was hot in their house or whatever, they would sleep on the roofs or outside, usually on the roof or whatever. And there they would see God's glory. They'd see the Milky Way. I mean, amazing Milky Way. All the stars you couldn't. Oftentimes, I've been in dark places where I can't see constellations because there's too many stars, right? It's very hard. I've had a hard time finding the Little Dipper. In Austin, I can find it pretty quick, or at least a little bit outside Austin. So they were very familiar with this. And there was a lot more to do with astrology, but it was more in relation to royalty, right? So when a comet appeared, that usually meant that there's something probably bad's going to happen to the current ruler of your area, type of thing, more often than not on it. Does that kind of answer your question? I mean, the people, the average Joe person, they just looked up there and they just saw this stuff. You didn't have a school system. They didn't teach you stuff, right? They probably didn't follow the movements of the planets and all that kind of stuff. They didn't care. The astrologers did, though.
Excellent, thank you
Right.
very much, Ed.
Okay.
Very much appreciate it.